The night sky above the human colony of Ardent Prime was quiet, filled with shining stars and the soft glow of 2 moons. People lived peaceful lives on the surface, families laughing, children running through the wide streets, traders closing their stalls as night arrived. For 100 years, Ardent Prime had been safe, far from war and violence. No one thought danger would come. But in the darkness beyond the system, danger was already moving. Ships without names, black as shadows, entered human space. They were not traders. They were not explorers. They came with one purpose only: to erase the world. The first sign came from the orbital defense station. A tired officer, looking at his console, saw a flicker of movement. At first he thought it was a sensor error. But then the numbers grew, dozens, then hundreds of unknown signatures. His heart froze. He pressed the alarm, his voice shaking as he called out. All stations, unidentified fleet approaching, massive fleet. On the planet below, sirens began to scream. People looked up at the sky, confused. Some thought it was only a drill. Others felt the chill of fear run down their spines. In orbit, human defense ships scrambled to meet the threat. Sleek destroyers and heavy cruisers rushed forward, their engines burning bright. The captains knew they were outnumbered, but they had no choice. This was their home. This was their duty. The alien ships moved like shadows, silent and cold. No warnings, no messages. They opened fire first. Beams of burning light cut through human ships like paper. Explosions lit the void. Brave crews fought back, launching missiles and plasma fire, but the enemy seemed endless. One by one, human ships fell, burning wrecks drifting into the dark. On the planet, the people watched the sky. Some saw bright flashes like stars being born. Others realized what it meant: their defenders were dying. Mothers pulled their children close, fathers locked their doors though doors could not stop what was coming. The governor of Ardent Prime tried to send a message to Earth. His hands shook as he spoke into the recorder. This is Ardent Prime. We are under attack, massive enemy fleet. They want to erase us. Send help, please send help. But even as his message left the planet, the aliens descended. Columns of fire rained down from orbit. Whole cities burned. Towers melted, roads cracked open, screams filled the air. The invaders were merciless. They did not conquer. They destroyed. One young boy, standing on a hill, watched as fire swallowed his city. He could not look away. The sky above was red, glowing with death. He asked his mother why they were doing this. She could not answer. She only held him close as the heat grew. The aliens wanted nothing left. No life. No hope. Hours later, silence came. Smoke covered the land where forests had once grown. Oceans boiled in places, mountains broke apart. Ardent Prime, once a shining human world, was gone. But one thing survived: the message. It reached Earth 2 weeks later. The leaders of humanity gathered in silence as the recording played. They watched the governor's pale face, his voice filled with terror. They saw the flashes in the sky, the burning cities, the cries of a dying people. When the message ended, there was nothing but silence in the great chamber. No one spoke for a long time. Then, slowly, the leader of Earth's Defense Command stood. His voice was low, steady, and filled with iron. They think we will forget. They think we will fear them. They are wrong. They will learn who we are. They will learn what it means to strike humanity. Around him, officers and generals nodded. Eyes filled with fire. Every heart burned with the same thought: revenge. Ships were already being built, larger and stronger than before. Soldiers trained harder, swearing oaths they would never break. From Earth to Mars, from the moons of Jupiter to the far colonies, humanity answered the call. The fleet of Retribution was coming. And when it launched, the stars themselves would tremble. The news of Ardent Prime's destruction spread like fire across the human colonies. People could not believe it at first. A whole world, gone in only a single night. Billions dead. Families wiped out. The thought was too heavy to accept, yet the message was clear: the enemy had no mercy. On Earth, the streets filled with people holding banners and torches. Some wept, some shouted with anger, and some stood in silence, their faces pale with grief. In the great cities of Mars, workers left their machines and joined the marches. Even in the frozen colonies of Europa and Titan, people gathered in domes and cried out for justice. Everywhere, one voice rose. Remember Ardent Prime. Make them pay. The leaders of humanity knew they could not wait. 1,000 years of slow building, of fragile peace between colonies, was shattered in a single strike. Now humanity had only one path. They would strike back. They would gather their strength and unleash it. In the shipyards of Earth, massive frames rose like iron mountains. Workers swarmed over them, welding armor plates, fixing engines the size of towers. Huge cannons were mounted, each one strong enough to break a battleship apart. At night, the workers kept going, eyes burning with determination. They remembered the screams of Ardent Prime and gave every drop of energy to their work. On Mars, old warships were pulled from storage, refitted with new weapons. Pilots trained day and night in the red skies, practicing maneuvers until their hands bled. Veterans of past wars stood beside young recruits, teaching them, shaping them, turning fear into steel. Across the colonies, the call went out: join the fleet. Men and women, farmers and miners, teachers and engineers, all lined up at the recruitment stations. Some were too young, some too old. But none cared. They all wanted the same thing: to fight. In one training camp, a girl named Lyra watched as recruits marched in silence. Her brother had died on Ardent Prime. She had not even been able to bury him. Now she wore the uniform, her hands shaking as she held the rifle for the first time. But when the drill master shouted at her, she straightened her back and did not drop it. She swore she would not break. Far above Earth, the first ships of the new fleet gathered. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and the massive dreadnoughts, each one a city of steel. Their names were painted in bold letters: justice, vengeance, honor, fury. Names chosen not for beauty, but for memory. At the heart of it all stood the flagship, Eternal Resolve. It was the largest ship humanity had ever built, forged with the strongest armor, armed with weapons that could tear through planets. Its captain, Admiral Reinhold Kale, stood on the command deck, staring into the void. His eyes were cold. His voice was calm. "We are not going to defend," he told his officers. "We are going to strike. For Ardent Prime. For every child they burned. For every voice they silenced. Humanity will not bow. Humanity will not break. We will show them our fury." The officers saluted, their faces hard. They knew this mission was not only war, it was survival. If humanity failed now, more worlds would burn. Meanwhile, scouts were already moving through the dark, seeking the enemy. Small, fast ships slipped through space, avoiding detection, listening for signals, searching for the shadow fleet that had destroyed Ardent Prime. Reports returned, whispers of strange movements near the edge of the Orion Arm. A vast enemy presence. A nest of killers waiting in the dark. The commanders listened to the scouts, marked their maps, and planned. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could mean another world lost. But one thing was certain: when the fleet of Retribution left, it would not return until the enemy paid. The day came at last. Millions gathered on Earth and across the colonies. Giant screens showed the fleet in orbit, row upon row of shining ships, their engines glowing bright. Hymns of war filled the air. Children waved flags, old veterans raised their hands in salute, and families whispered prayers for the ones who would not return. On the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale stood tall as his officers prepared for departure. His words were sent across the fleet, carried to every pilot, every soldier, every worker who had built a single piece of metal for this day. Today, humanity rises. Today, we take the fire they gave us and return it tenfold. The stars will remember this fleet. The enemy will remember our fury. For Ardent Prime. For Ardent Prime, the voices of thousands roared back. Engines ignited. One by one, ships turned toward the dark beyond. The fleet moved like a wave of steel, leaving Earth behind, heading into the silent night where the enemy waited. As the people watched them vanish into the stars, a silence fell. Everyone knew the truth. Some of those ships would never return. Some of those faces would never be seen again. But everyone also knew something else. This was the beginning. Humanity was no longer hiding. Humanity was coming. The fleet of Retribution had risen. And soon, the stars would burn. The fleet of Retribution sailed into the endless night of space, thousands of engines glowing like stars against the black. For weeks they traveled in silence, crossing the void, moving farther from the safety of human colonies. No music, no laughter, only the sound of orders and the hum of machines. Every crew member carried the same thought: find the enemy, make them pay. Admiral Kale stood on the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes never left the star maps. Scouts had reported signs of movement ahead, broken signals, trails of radiation, ghostly shadows in the dark. The enemy was close. He could feel it. On one of the smaller ships, a young pilot named Joran sat in his cockpit, running through checks. His ship was a fast interceptor, built for speed and sharp strikes. He tried to stay calm, but his hands shook slightly on the controls. He thought of his parents back on Mars, who had told him to come home safe. He whispered to himself, "For Ardent Prime. For humanity." Then he pulled his helmet tight. The silence of space broke suddenly. A warning blared across the fleet. Sensors lit up with red signals. Dozens of unknown contacts appeared at the edge of the system. The enemy had found them. All ships, prepare for battle. Admiral Kale's voice thundered across the channels. Hold formation. No fear. The alien fleet came fast, their ships dark and sharp like blades. They moved in perfect silence, but their weapons spoke loud. Beams of burning light shot forward, tearing through the emptiness, striking at the human vanguard. 2 destroyers were hit at once, one splitting apart, the other spinning into fire. But humanity did not break. Human cruisers answered with missiles and plasma fire. Bright explosions filled the void. Fighters poured out of carriers, swarming toward the enemy like angry wasps. The sky of stars turned into fire and chaos. Joran's interceptor shot forward, engines screaming. He weaved through beams of light, his heart pounding. An alien ship appeared ahead, black and sharp. He locked on, fired 2 missiles, and watched them strike true. The enemy ship burst into flames, breaking apart. Joran shouted in triumph, but only for a moment. Another beam cut past his wing, close enough to scorch the paint. He pulled hard, sweat running down his face. On the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale gave orders with cold precision. Push them back. Do not scatter. Strike as one fist. His officers relayed commands, moving ships like pieces on a deadly board. The dreadnought's massive cannons fired, tearing through enemy cruisers, explosions lighting the void like suns. Still, the enemy pressed hard. Their ships were fast, endless, like a tide of steel. Human ships fought bravely, but more were lost with every passing minute. In one corner of the battle, the carrier Vanguard took heavy fire. Its hull burned, air venting into the void. Hundreds of fighters tried to return, but the carrier split apart before they could land. The screams of pilots filled the comms, then cut into silence. But even as ships died, humanity pushed forward. Their fury was greater than their fear. Every death only fed their fire. Every scream only sharpened their will. Joran's squadron regrouped, cutting into a formation of enemy fighters. He fired again and again, each shot hitting true. His squadron leader's voice echoed in his ears. "Stay with me. Push them into the dreadnought's range." Together they forced the enemy back, driving them into the line of human heavy ships. Cannons roared. Enemy fighters vanished in fire. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The battle raged, ships burning, men and women dying, but humanity did not yield. Then, at last, the tide shifted. The aliens began to pull back. Their formations broke, their ships retreating into the dark. A cheer rose across the fleet. For the first time, humanity had stood against the Shadow Fleet and forced them to flee. But Admiral Kale did not cheer. He stood silent, watching the battlefield littered with wreckage, human and alien alike. Thousands of lives lost, dozens of ships gone. His heart was heavy, but his eyes burned with resolve. This was only their first test, he said quietly. They wanted to see our strength. They will return with more. And deep inside, he was right. Far away, in the dark systems beyond human maps, the alien commanders watched the battle reports. For the first time, they had seen humans fight back, not as prey, but as warriors. The aliens did not feel fear, but they felt something else, interest. This enemy was different. This enemy was dangerous. In the shadows, they began to prepare their true fleets. The war had only just begun. The wreckage of the first battle drifted in silence. Broken ships, both human and alien, floated through the void like graves without names. Fires slowly died, and the stars shone coldly above the dead. Humanity had won its first stand, but the cost was written in blood and steel. On the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale walked the silent corridors. Crew members stood at attention as he passed, their faces pale with exhaustion. Some had lost friends, some had lost whole families on ships that would never return. Yet none spoke of giving up. Their eyes were hard, filled with the same flame. Continue, no matter the cost. Kale entered the strategy chamber. Holograms of the battlefield glowed above the table, showing red marks where enemy ships had fallen. But far more worrying were the signals beyond, the enemy retreat paths. The shadows were moving deeper into unknown space, farther from human charts. His officers stood waiting. General Soren, tall and stern, spoke first. Admiral, our scouts confirm the aliens are regrouping. Their fleet is larger than we feared. This battle was not their full strength. Kale nodded. He already knew it. Then we must strike before they gather. If we wait, they will come again, stronger. We will take the fight into their shadow. The officers exchanged glances. To push deeper meant danger, perhaps disaster. They would be leaving the edges of human space, chasing an enemy into the dark where no maps existed. But none argued. They understood, the only way forward was through the fire. The order was given. Scouts raced ahead, slipping into the unknown. Days turned into weeks as the fleet followed, each star system darker than the last. Strange signals echoed in the void, whispers of movement, ruins of shattered colonies not human, but alien. Ancient worlds burned long before humanity had even reached the stars. Lyra, the young soldier who had once trained with trembling hands, now stood guard aboard a cruiser. Her uniform was stained, her eyes sharper than before. She had seen death too closely in the last battle. At night she dreamed of fire raining from the sky, just as it had fallen on Ardent Prime. But when she woke, she gripped her rifle and told herself, not again. Never again. On his interceptor, Joran grew restless. The silence of the long journey pressed down on him. He missed the roar of battle, though he hated himself for it. Every night he checked the photo of his family. He told himself he would return, even if he had to carve a path through the enemy alone. At last, the scouts returned with grim news. They had found something, an enemy stronghold, hidden in the dark of a dead system. The reports described massive shipyards orbiting a shattered planet. Thousands of alien ships moved like insects, building, preparing. It was not only a fleet. It was a nest. The chamber aboard the Eternal Resolve fell silent as the images appeared. The scale was terrifying. If the Shadow Fleet finished gathering here, they would have enough power to sweep across human space and burn it all. Admiral Kale spoke with iron in his voice. Then this is where we strike. We will burn their nest before it hatches. The plan was set. Carriers would release waves of fighters to cripple the shipyards. Cruisers and destroyers would target their fuel lines. The dreadnoughts, led by Eternal Resolve, would strike at the enemy's command ships. It would not be easy. It would not be clean. But it was the only way. The fleet prepared in silence. Weapons were armed, shields charged, engines primed. Soldiers checked their rifles. Pilots whispered quiet promises to themselves. Across the ships, the same words passed from mouth to mouth. For Ardent Prime. For humanity. Then the fleet moved. They slipped into the system like a blade into flesh. At first, the alien stronghold did not notice. The shadows continued their endless work, ships drifting in patterns, lights blinking across the black. Then the first human missiles struck. Explosions tore through the shipyards. Fire spread from one station to another. Alarms blared in alien tongues. The shadows turned, caught off guard, but humanity was already upon them. Fighters swarmed, streaking through the black with trails of fire. They struck hard and fast, tearing into construction lines, blowing apart half-built ships. Cruisers roared forward, unleashing plasma and missiles. Whole sections of the enemy's nest burned at once. Joran's squadron dove straight into the chaos. He fired missile after missile, watching stations crack open like eggs. Enemy fighters scrambled to meet them, black and sharp, but this time the humans were ready. Dogfights erupted, beams and fire weaving across the void. Joran twisted and rolled, heart racing, as explosions lit the stars around him. On the ground of a broken moon, alien war factories began to burn. Lyra and her unit had been dropped to strike at the core. She charged with her rifle, firing at shadow soldiers who moved with deadly precision. She felt fear, but she did not stop. She remembered her brother's face, and she pulled the trigger again and again. The battle raged without mercy. Human losses mounted, but so did the enemies. The nest that had seemed unstoppable began to crumble. Flames spread, wreckage drifted, the shadows broke apart. On the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale watched with cold satisfaction. "Let them feel it," he said softly. "Let them taste our fury." But even as victory seemed near, sensors screamed with warning. From the edge of the system, new signals appeared. Dozens, then hundreds. The true enemy fleet was coming. The trap had been sprung. The system shook with fire. Wreckage drifted in every direction, shipyards cracked apart, and alien stations burned like dying suns. Humanity had struck hard, cutting deep into the enemy's nest. For a moment, it felt like victory. But the warning sirens did not stop. On the Eternal Resolve, red lights flashed across the bridge. Officers shouted over each other, their voices tight with fear. New signals poured onto the star map, dozens of enemy warships arriving at once, then hundreds more. The true fleet, the core of the Shadow Armada, had been waiting in the dark. Admiral Kale stood firm, his face carved from stone. "So, they wanted us to come. They wanted us to believe we were winning." His voice grew hard. "Then let us show them what humanity does when cornered." The enemy fleet surged in like a storm. Vast warships blotted out the stars, their hulls black and endless. Weapons flared to life, lances of light cutting through space. One human destroyer was torn apart instantly, then another. Explosions spread, shockwaves shaking nearby cruisers. The human fleet turned to meet them. Cannons roared, missiles streaked forward, and the void filled with fire. Fighters screamed past each other, dogfights exploding into blinding flashes. Joran's squadron dove straight into the heart of it. His hands gripped the controls so tight his knuckles went white. Beams of light crossed his cockpit, close enough to blind him. He fired missiles at an enemy fighter, saw it burst apart, then rolled hard to avoid another. His squadron leader's voice shouted through the calm, "Stay sharp. Stay alive." But staying alive was not simple. All around him, human fighters were torn apart. The enemy pressed them, wave after wave, endless in number. Joran clenched his teeth. Fear pounded in his chest, but he refused to pull back. "For Ardent Prime," he whispered, firing again. On the surface of the broken moon, Lyra and her unit fought in chaos. Alien ground soldiers poured from hidden bunkers, armored and ruthless. Their weapons cut down humans one by one. Lyra's ears rang with the sound of explosions, her eyes burned from smoke, but she kept moving. She dragged a wounded soldier to cover, then turned and fired into the advancing shadows. She thought of her brother, thought of the burning of her world. Each thought made her finger tighten on the trigger. She was not going to fall here. If this was a trap, she would bite the enemy's hand before she died. Back in orbit, the dreadnought Eternal Resolve fought like a titan. Its cannons fired in constant rhythm, tearing through alien cruisers, blasting apart their shields. But the enemy kept coming. One alien battleship slammed into its side with firepower enough to break a city. The dreadnought shook, alarms screaming, crew thrown from their stations. But Admiral Kale stood tall, his voice steady. "Hold the line. We bleed, but we do not break." The crew answered with action. They rerouted power, fired every weapon, and the alien battleship split apart under their wrath. Yet the dreadnought's armor glowed red with damage, smoke filling its halls. Around it, smaller human ships were dying fast. The cruiser Iron Spear took a direct hit and split in two. The carrier Honor's Light tried to pull back, but enemy fighters swarmed it, cutting it apart until it burned silently. Every death was a knife, but still the fleet fought. Kale knew the truth. The trap had sprung, and humanity was bleeding. But retreat was impossible. If they turned and ran, the enemy would chase them, break them, and sweep into human space. The only hope was to hold, to bleed the enemy until nothing was left of their nest. His eyes hardened. "We will not give them a victory. We will make this their grave." And so the order spread. Human ships pushed harder, slamming into enemy lines with reckless fury. Cruisers fired until their cannons melted. Fighters dove straight into enemy formations, exploding themselves to break through. Soldiers on the moon charged with bayonets when their rifles ran dry. Joran's interceptor was hit, alarms blaring. Smoke filled his cockpit, his vision blurred. For a moment he thought it was the end. But then he saw an alien command ship ahead, black and massive, controlling the fighter swarms. With what power remained, he locked on, fired his last missiles, and aimed his burning ship straight at it. The missiles struck, his fighter rammed into the hull, and the alien ship exploded in a blaze that lit the void. The swarm broke apart in confusion. Lyra, on the moon below, watched the skies light up with fire. She screamed with the others, charging forward one last time. The aliens fell back, retreating into their bunkers as human artillery smashed into them. The surface shook, fire pouring across the dark rocks. The battle lasted for hours. In the end, both fleets were broken, both sides bleeding. The human fleet held the field, but at a terrible price. Half their ships were gone, tens of thousands dead. The Eternal Resolve floated scarred and burning, but still alive. On its bridge, Admiral Kale stood in silence, watching the wreckage of enemies and allies alike. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "They thought this was our end. But they have only fed the fire. Humanity will not stop here. We will not die in the dark." And far away, in the deeper black, more alien fleets stirred. The trap had cost them dearly, but it had also shown them something they had never faced before, an enemy who refused to bow, who fought even when surrounded. The shadows whispered to each other in their silent language. Humanity was dangerous. The war was far from over. The battlefield was quiet at last. The stars burned above the wreckage of two shattered fleets. Broken ships drifted, glowing faintly as their fires died. The silence was heavy, almost holy, as if space itself mourned the dead. The human fleet still lived, but only barely. Half the ships were gone. The others were scarred, their hulls cracked, their engines coughing smoke into the void. Fighters returned in handfuls, many with broken wings, some with only silence where pilots should have been. On the Eternal Resolve, crew members moved like ghosts. They carried stretchers, repaired systems, and whispered names of those who would never answer again. The ship was still alive, but its halls smelled of blood and burned steel. Admiral Cale stood on the bridge, his uniform torn, his face marked with ash. He had not left since the battle began. His officers watched him, waiting for his words, but for a long time he said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the wreckage outside, on the fire still glowing in the dark. At last, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the deck. They thought this would break us. They thought this would end us. But look around. We still stand. The crew lifted their heads. Exhaustion still weighed on them, but a spark lit in their eyes. Cale continued. Every ship that burned, every soul that fell, they did not die for nothing. They lit the fire that guides us forward. Humanity will not bow. Humanity will not end here. We will rise from this. His words spread through the comms to every surviving ship. Pilots in their cockpits, soldiers in their bunks, engineers in smoke-filled rooms, they all heard, and they all held their heads higher. On the surface of the broken moon, Lyra sat with her rifle across her knees. Her uniform was stained with dust and blood, her arms trembling from exhaustion. Around her, the survivors of her unit rested in silence. Too many were gone. Too many names would never be spoken again. But when the message from Cale reached them, she closed her eyes and gripped her rifle tighter. She remembered her brother's face, the fire that had consumed her world, and she whispered the same words as the admiral. We still stand. In the hangar of a cruiser, Joran's name was written on a wall with hundreds of others. His fighter had gone down in fire when he struck the alien command ship. The squadron leader stood in silence, his helmet under his arm. He saluted the wall and whispered, "For Ardent Prime, for Joran." Humanity mourned, but it did not collapse. Repairs began at once. Engineers worked without sleep, welding torn armor, fixing broken reactors, patching hulls that barely held. Medical bays overflowed, doctors moving from bed to bed, trying to save every life they could. Supplies were shared between ships, no one left behind. The fleet licked its wounds, but it did not turn back. Scouts were sent again, slipping deeper into the black. What they found shook every soul who saw the reports. The enemy fleets were vast, far larger than even Cale had guessed. Whole systems filled with factories, shipyards, and war machines. The battle they had fought, the nest they had destroyed, it was only one branch of a greater tree. In the strategy chamber, officers argued in low voices. Some said they should retreat to human space, warn the colonies, prepare for defense. Others said retreat would only give the enemy time to grow stronger, that they had to strike again, even wounded. Cale listened in silence. Then he spoke, calm but unyielding. If we return now, they will come for us in greater numbers. If we stay, we bleed. But there is no safe road. There is no easy choice. The only path is forward. We will strike again, and again, until even the darkest shadow knows the name of humanity. His words ended the debate. The officers bowed their heads and set to work. Across the fleet, soldiers sharpened their resolve. Lyra cleaned her rifle, her hands steady now. Pilots painted new marks on their fighters, flames, fists, the words Retribution and Never Again. Engineers scratched names of the fallen into the steel of the ships, so the dead would always ride with them. The fleet of Retribution was broken but not destroyed. It was scarred but not defeated. And in its scars, something new was born, a will harder than steel, sharper than fire. In the darkness far away, the shadow commanders gathered. They had seen their prey survive the trap. They had seen them fight even when surrounded, even when bleeding. For the first time, the shadows felt something like doubt. Humanity had not fallen. Humanity had only begun to rise. The fire would not die. It would spread. And soon, it would burn across the stars. The scars of the last battle still marked the fleet. Ships carried blackened armor, engines burned, weapons patched together with desperate hands. Yet despite the wounds, they moved forward. The fire in their hearts was stronger than the pain in their hulls. Humanity had chosen its path. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Only the strike. Admiral Kale stood on the bridge of the Eternal Resolve. Before him, the star maps glowed, filled with signals of enemy strongholds. The shadows spread across countless systems, their fleets unending, their factories eternal. Against such numbers, humanity was small. But Kale did not tremble. Size does not decide fate, he told his officers. Will does. They believe they can drown us in numbers. They are wrong. They will learn fear. The order was given. The fleet of Retribution split into strike groups, each one aimed at a different enemy stronghold. They would not wait for the enemy to gather again. They would cut into them like blades, burning their factories, tearing their supply lines, making them bleed until their vast numbers meant nothing. The first strike came at dawn on a shattered world where alien factories glowed like hives. Human cruisers fell upon them, unleashing storms of missiles. The factories cracked apart, fire spreading across the surface. Alien warships rushed to defend, but human fighters swarmed them, weaving between beams of light, tearing holes through their armor. For Ardent Prime! The pilots shouted as they dove. Lyra was among the soldiers dropped onto the planet's surface. She led her unit through fire and smoke, her rifle steady, her voice strong. She had once been a girl who trembled in training. Now she was a leader, her eyes hard, her will unbreakable. Forward! She shouted, and her soldiers followed without hesitation. They stormed bunkers, tore down defenses, and planted the human flag in the heart of the enemy hive. In orbit, the Eternal Resolve fought side by side with other dreadnoughts. Their cannons boomed, tearing through enemy ships. One by one, the alien vessels fell, exploding in flames. Kale watched, his voice cold as iron. This is the price of touching humanity. But the strikes did not end there. Every day, a new report came. A human task force had burned another station. Another supply convoy destroyed. Another enemy factory shattered. The shadows who once believed themselves unstoppable now struggled to answer a foe who refused to bow. The galaxy began to whisper the story. Colonies that once feared now raised their heads with hope. Other alien species, once silent and hidden, watched carefully. Some saw humanity as reckless. Others saw them as something new, a fire that could not be crushed. For the shadows, the war was no longer simple. They had faced prey before, but never prey that struck back. Never prey that turned into hunters. Weeks turned to months. The fleet of Retribution carved a path of fire through the dark. Losses were heavy, too heavy, but still the humans pressed on. Every battle scarred them, but every battle also made them harder, sharper, fiercer. At last, they reached the heart of the Shadow Empire, a system with a black sun and a world wrapped in armor, a fortress unlike any they had ever seen. Here the Shadow commanders waited, their greatest fleets gathered. The final battle began. It was not silent. It was thunder across the void. Thousands of ships clashed, weapons blazing, explosions tearing the darkness apart. The Eternal Resolve led the charge, its guns screaming, its engines burning like suns. Lyra fought on the surface of the fortress world, her rifle never still. She charged with her soldiers through walls of fire, cutting down shadow warriors, planting charges on their machines. She did not think of fear anymore. She only thought of victory. Kale stood tall on his bridge, watching the largest war humanity had ever fought. His voice carried across every channel, into every cockpit, into every heart. Humanity is not prey. Humanity is not weak. We are the fire that burns the dark. And today, we end this shadow. The fleet roared back, one voice, one will, one fury. The battle raged for hours, days, until at last the fortress world cracked apart, its surface breaking in fire. The Shadow fleet shattered, their formations broken, their commanders silent forever. When the smoke cleared, the fleet of Retribution still stood. Fewer in number, scarred and bloodied, but alive. Victorious. Across the galaxy, the message spread, humanity had faced the dark and had not fallen. They had struck back. They had endured. And they had won. The shadows had thought themselves eternal. But humanity had proven something greater: eternal resolve, eternal fury, eternal fire. The war was not the end of humanity. It was only the beginning.